Welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at MarketSurge.
And welcome back to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. I'm your host, Reed Hansen, and today we're diving into something that almost nobody talks about enough in marketing: what happens after the lead comes in. Because there's a lot of uncomfortable truths that people just are having a hard time accepting. Businesses pour money into marketing, they generate leads, and even get a flood of interest, and then the experience behind the scenes completely breaks down. Great marketing promises something amazing, but operations are what actually deliver it. Our guest today lives right at that intersection. Kasandra Murray is a marketing and operations consultant and founder of Unlucky Umbrella Studio, where she helps businesses align their marketing with the systems and processes that actually sustain growth. Her work focuses on building frameworks that don't just generate leads, they help teams deliver better experiences and turn one-time customers into loyal repeat clients. Today, we're going to talk about why great campaigns fail once leads start coming in, the systems businesses need if they actually want sustainable growth, and the metrics that leaders should really be paying attention to. Kasandra, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, well, really glad to have you. Now, as I mentioned, you comprise your work, it covers both marketing and operations. Now, when you mishmash anything, it could be, a variety of things, but why did you think that was such a critical intersection and that you saw it being so disconnected in many businesses?
So a lot of that came from my experience at my previous workplace. So I was originally hired as a designer, but I fell in love with the operations side of the business. So it was a startup. I was the first employee, and we really got heavy into processes, right? How do you solve problems? And once we turned into this oil machine that we were producing jobs that even competitors that were 10 or even 40 times our size couldn't do, we got into the marketing side of the business. And we realized that foundation that we had built on the operations and the training and processes let us created this reputation, right? That kept people coming back to us because every time they left, because they were like, this competitor's cheaper, they would come back, say a month later and be like, they were cheaper, but now we know why they were cheaper. And we started to dabble into helping consult other businesses. And one of my favorite stories is I had a business that came in and they're like, we're ready to double our marketing spend. They were spending around $40,000 in magazine advertisements. And I was like, before we do that, let me see what the stats are, what are the numbers? And for them, they weren't picking up 50% of their calls. So I sat the owners down and I was like, hey, we can double your marketing spend and spend your money till you're blue in the face. But if you're not going to pick up the phone, it's not going to make a difference. And what we did is we worked on setting up a call center for them. I vetted a bunch of different call centers for them. I helped set up the script and train people on how this process would be. And that one change was a fraction, right? Instead of spending another $40,000, I think the investment was about $600 a month on average. That increased their revenue by 40%. So I think there's a lot of flashy stuff out there about marketing and dropping a ton of money on marketing and trying to keep up with competitors. But I often try to teach people that the goal is to stand out. And if your competitors don't have a good process or a good system or good customer experience, you can very easily stand out that way versus just dumping a ton of money into marketing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, you do this on an ongoing basis. You come into a company and, you try to assess problems or potential inefficiencies. Are there certain operational red flags that you see over and over that might signal that marketing is going to be a struggle, or even vice versa? Marketing red flags that signal the operations are going to...
Yeah. And actually, the one thing I see in a majority of businesses, and I even work with businesses that are $100 million or more in sales, is processes and documenting the processes. There is so much gap between knowledge of, say, your leads or your leadership and the people that you're onboarding or the people you're trying to train to become individual contributors. That knowledge gap is so bad. And there's a stat out there that I recently found. It was 20% of an employee's day is spent just trying to find out how to do something within their job title. And that can be looking for documentation or asking coworkers, which now you're using that coworker's time to try to solve that problem. That's a huge chunk of time. It's 5 hours in a 40-hour work week. So in a full week, people are spending almost an entire day just trying to figure out how to do their job properly. And I will say that is the most common like issue that I'm running into with every business that I consult with is getting that documented. And a lot of times it's they feel they don't have time to do the documentation. But when you look at that 20% number, you do. You just don't realize you just need to reallocate some of that time to documentation instead of trying to find documentation.
Okay, so I'm going to veer a little off topic. We talked about some things I wanted to cover, but when you talk about large organizations, 100 million in revenue and above, and you point out a problem, that the employees don't necessarily know all the things they need to do to complete their job. I've run into that before. I've worked for some large organizations as an employee, experienced that as well. How do you find somebody at those organizations that wants to fix it? Because I've also experienced that there's enough like corporate inertia that they don't actually want to fix it. Like, what are the characteristics of a buyer or a advocate inside those organizations that wants to fix it?
Yeah, I call them like champions.
Okay.
And one thing that I think some businesses get wrong when it comes to processes is they try to make it like top down. So leadership just tells everybody like, we need processes and we need to do it. And at the end of the day, like some people, just in general, people are resistant to having somebody tell you what to do, right? And we need to focus more on how humans behave and like the psychology behind that. And one thing I really recommend is leadership obviously should be backing and supporting the initiative of building processes, but they need to find somebody that is not necessarily in leadership position to champion creating processes and stuff like that. And the reason why I highly recommend going that route is because if you're working and you see your coworker's day has gotten so much easier, right? Because they have these processes and these documents that they reference, you're more likely to shift towards what they're doing than if leadership says you need to start following processes and here's this binder of information that you need to read through, but we're not going to give you time to read through it. So it should be the foundational support and should encourage specifically like one person, trying to find one person who really loves processes and can engage their coworkers to follow processes. I work with really small organizations too, and it is the toughest thing to do. That's that change management, and it is so hard to get humans to break old habits and build new ones. But one way to do it is from within, right? You plant a seed and that creates roots and it infects everybody because everybody wants to be a part of that success and they want to be good at their jobs.
Right. Okay. I think that makes a ton of sense. Do you observe any particular lines of business that, or business functions where they have these breakdowns more often? So a few examples might be like the sales process, the onboarding or ongoing support, or even communication between the support team itself internally. Are there any key areas where you see this breakdown happen more often?
I don't know if I would say there's any place like more often than not that you see the issue. And I think it is also like industry to industry, right? Or like the specific point of which a business is in. I have some businesses that they've been running for 20 years. And the problem really isn't that they aren't getting new customers or customers aren't coming back for repeat business. The problem is more on the employee's quality of life, right? Where employees are stressed every day, leadership stressed every day because it feels like they're putting out fires every day. And a lot of that stems from inconsistency on how everything is done. When you don't have a process, you're reinventing the wheel every day. I have some businesses that approach me because that's the problem, right? And that creates high turnover. And that is very expensive in any business. But I also have other businesses that are, say, like more in what I would say like their early stages. And they have a breakdown between booking the meeting with the client and then turning them into a lead, right? Like they don't have a process built there and they're losing revenue that way. For example, that call system, right? So it's there's never like one point where I see, oh, everybody struggles in this one point of the customer journey. It is definitely very dependent on the business. And my focus is not only like improving that customer journey, but improving employees' experience. There's this big counterculture going on about people just don't like working and they don't like where they work. And what I have found is a lot of that stems from lack of processes, lack of leadership having clear direction. In these things, it sounds like such a simple solution to solve turnover, but I've seen it firsthand that processes completely can change employee turnover.
That's, I guess, concerning and maybe encouraging for those that do something about it. So,
Yeah.
well, that's really good to know. So as we were prepping for this in your material and your writing, you have an approach you called the operations improvement funnel. Can you describe that and maybe walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah. So the funnel has 4 main stages. The very top stage is processes, which you're probably going to get tired of hearing me say that
Yeah,
word, but it
that's
is
great.
processes. The second stage of the funnel is training. The third stage is situational. And then the last stage is individual. So, how this works is whenever you have even success in your business or failure, you should be running through this like funnel, right? And I normally it happens like we call them postmortems. So like in my previous company, if something went wrong, the team would sit down and we would run through this funnel. And the first questions we're always asking is like, what's the process, right? Is there a process? Is the process easy to find? Is it easy to follow? Is the process over engineered to where nobody wants to read it and that's why nobody's following it? Um, if we go through all of that, then we would go to the next stage, which would be training. So the process is good. There's no issue with processes. Let's look at training. How many times have we shown people how to do this process? Do they need a refresher? Do we need to tweak the way that we trained doing that process? If process and training both have succeeded, we pass the test on process and training during a failure, then we look at situational and individual. But what I will say before I go into those two is we found that about 95% of our problems fall under the process or training parts of the funnel.
Okay.
And you do have to do a lot of inward soul searching, right? Because it does require leadership to admit that they have failed in some way. I didn't train somebody enough. The processes that we built aren't good enough. We need to fix those. But if process and training really check out, then there's situations that just are outside of your control, right? I come from manufacturing. Really good example is the power went out, right? If the power goes out and you can't get orders out because the power went out, that there's nobody at fault there, right?
Right.
There's still things you could implement if you wanted to. So you're like, let's get a backup generator to solve that problem. But that's where situation goes. And then individual is the very last stage. And I will say majority of the time, we never got to that stage when we were reviewing failures. And individual is really, this is when you should be having a conversation with the person and going, why aren't you following the process? We've trained you multiple times. What's not sticking? You're at this point, people are actively choosing not to follow the process. And it's not really, it is the individual, right? But like I said, like very rare that we ever got to that point of an individual was the problem and it wasn't anything else. And what I've noticed how most businesses run is they focus on the individual first. So they're having the conversation with the individual about what they did wrong, what are they doing, why did they do it this way? And it just creates this environment of very defensive people and people who are more likely to blame or hide issues if something goes wrong. It just hurts your business in the long run too. So it's one of the things that I'm trying to flip how leadership thinks about tackling problems and not looking at the person, but looking at the processes and training that come before the person.
Okay. All right. So, one of the, just following along with that, I wanted to go touch on training just a little bit. You said that training can actually be a growth strategy, not just busy work or an HR function. How is that typically optimized? Training is, I mean, you've explained importantly why it is so important, and I don't have any objections to that. But how do you make it a growth strategy? How do you make it exciting?
Yeah, if we talk numbers first,
Yeah.
right? When we talk about like cost savings, so There's a stat out there that it's either 3 or 4 times, companies spend 3 or 4 times more money hiring somebody than they do training them. And I believe the average like cost to onboard somebody is around like $4 or $5,000. Um, Training, what the problem is, if you don't train people and you create this environment where there's no processes, everybody's stressed, you have high turnover, you're spending more money hiring people that are going to quit. And there's a huge cost savings in investing more into training than into kind of trying to manage turnover. A really good example is I come from manufacturing. Manufacturing has a turnover of about 6 months, is pretty typical in manufacturing, warehouse work. We extended that to 2.5 years after implementing processes and training. And normally when people leave us, they left us because the business just didn't grow fast enough for them. They went for management positions. They didn't move laterally, they moved in the whole process. So a lot of things we can't, that's what we want to do, right? When people leave us. So just in revenue, we talk about revenue alone, there is cost savings in spending more time and energy, taking that $4,000 and putting it towards creating a trainer, creating a training program, paying somebody to do the training for people. There's savings there. But when we talk about growth strategy too, when you don't have that high turnover, you create a better customer experience because you're not having to spend all that time making sure people aren't making mistakes during the process. And that better customer experience turns into a better reputation, more referrals, because I think the stat is what, like 70% of most businesses is referral based. Like if a majority of businesses, their revenue is coming from referral based business, creating that reputation is so important. And one way to do that is creating reliable people that are really good at their jobs.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So I've got two remaining questions. First, do any situations come to mind when I ask you what is the most chaotic operational system you've encountered? And if none or they're protected by NDA, that's fine too. But I'd be curious
Well,
if you have any great answers.
I've seen a lot of stuff. I think I have certain customers that I work with that we're working on right now, but their pricing system is like the Wild West. So, and it's based off of people's feelings and not like a system that backs it up for them. And sometimes in some industries, it's very hard to tell people like, you're not charging enough. You need to charge more. You're leaving money on the table. So that I see that, especially in manufacturing, that a lot in manufacturing. The Wild West like pricing system is pretty crazy for me. So I'm sure there's like others, but I can't think of any other that come to mind at the moment.
Well, no, that's all right. I'm sure you've seen a lot. And, I'm glad that there are people. I am definitely more of the chaotic mindset. And so I have employees, I have a spouse that are much more organized and process focused. So grateful for people like that in my life and grateful for experts like you as well. This is just total wild card question and it came to me mid podcast. Do you watch Love is Blind? Have you ever seen that show?
I see a lot of social media posts about
Okay.
it, but I've
Yes.
never sat down and watched it because I've seen enough crazy social media that I'm like, I can't do it.
Well, the funny thing is they just did the reunion episode for this recent season, which was all people from Ohio. And
Oh,
you
yes,
mentioned that you're
yes,
from
yes. I
Ohio.
did see some. That's why I was like, this is crazy because
And I
there
was
was,
like, my mind was spinning because your intonation, you do have a lovely Ohio accent. Not that I could have really put a finger on that before watching a whole season of Ohio people dating and talking but like I hear it and it's a lovely, warm, very friendly accent. And so anyway, if that's of interest,
I need to check it out,
you need to
basically, at
check it
least
out.
the Ohio episode.
Yeah, it's like season 10, it's all Columbus and Cleveland people. And anyway, lovely. But Cassandra, it's delightful to talk to you. I would really encourage people to reach out to you. I think there's a lot of businesses that could use this kind of help on process, training, troubleshooting, and making sure that their marketing operations are up to snuff. Where can they find you if they'd like to work with you?
Yeah, one of the best ways to reach me is through the website, which is literally just unluckyumbrella.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.